Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a tax-paying American and small business owner in the great state of Louisiana. I also happen to be a vampire. Now, in the past year, there's been a lot of inflammatory talk from politicians warning their constituents not to trust vampires. The truth is, vampires are as different from each other as humans are, and we ask only to be treated as such.
It's a post-Russell Edgington world, everyone, and we win back the human public one smile at a time. No dead humans, or I will have your ass.
I'll deal with it personally.
What do you want from me?
Everything.
If you're gonna kill me, just do it.
Not till we got what we want.
So you're here to seduce me then?
I can eat who I want.
There's a new coven in town.
Would you all join me?
Oh, great. Now I have to deal with witches?
You're necromancers.
Restore with spirit of life.
If they can control the dead, then they can control us. This is nuts.
It's been a while since I got attacked by a vampire, and guess what? It still sucks.
When you came in, the air went out.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone. Joining me today here is James. Say hi, James.
Hi, how you doing, everybody?
Today we are going to explore the modern vampire genre. Granted, the vampire genre is gigantic. You know, it's been around since literally
20s.
The 20s, as far as
On
films go.
I mean,
right.
yeah.
On literature, forget it. It's been around longer than that. But them actually putting it on film, bringing it into television, you know, that started in the 20s as far as the film versions go. We are going to discuss some of the more modern ones, including the Twilight Saga, True Blood, as far as television goes, and we're going to hit a couple of modern films. Most recently, Fright Night and Let Me In are the latest entries in the film world as far as it goes, but we will go down the list of some of the more classic ones we remember from our childhood and recently, because these particular films seem to kind of trend in and they trend out. And, you know, in the old days, you know, when they first started in the 20s and the 30s and even the 40s and 50s, they went through these up and down cycles where they were very popular. And again, you're dealing with the beginning of film. You know, it was a different time back then. You didn't have that much output in terms of places where you can go see these type of things. There was no television, wasn't that big or not even around at certain points. But nowadays, you know, depending on what your medium is, you can find them and they kind of come back in style every now and then. But let's just quickly give a little bit of a background on where, at least the film side of vampire films, the big gigantic one, the first one that is considered to be the classic as far as film historians go, is Nosferatu, the silent German film.
With Max Schreck. That's basically the blueprint for how the vampire movie evolved.
You're talking about 1922 here.
And it's amazing how it's held up. And if you watch it, it's still got some scary elements to it, and the way it's shot. And, you know, obviously people make fun of it and you always see it in clips and things like that. But really, you know, it still holds up as a piece of horror.
Right. And for its time, not only is it a storytelling thing, but it's also special effects. You're dealing with trying to create some very early on creepy, scary, very crude by these days standards when you have CGI and all kinds of stuff like that.
Basically light tricks.
Right. Light tricks and cutting and editing tricks and this and that and smoke and mirrors, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But it still holds up pretty well. After that, the next big highlight when it comes to vampire films is Bela Lugosi's Dracula.
And that's who everybody thinks of as Dracula, the Cape.
Even more important and more memorable than Nosferatu is the Bela Lugosi picture of Dracula, the classic Count Dracula with the cape and the...
Even if you don't know the movie because you're too young or just not something you've ever seen, you'd know of it maybe from Ed Wood and that performance.
And that lasted for quite a while because, you know, the Bela Lugosi Draculas, they lasted, you know, for almost 20 years. You know, they kind of went through them. Son of Dracula.
They did it for so many years. He was almost too old at the end.
Yeah, and they try to mix them up and pair them up with different characters. And they actually, which is very important, is that they tried to change the genre at one point. They gave it a try, turn it into comedy, where you have Abbott and Costello get mixed up with some of these, classic Universal characters, including Dracula.
Probably those guys had the rights or something to, so they...
It was synergy and all that stuff.
I'm not sure if that...
Now, the next big wave of vampire films after that, you kind of have to jump ahead about 10, 12 years into the Hammer films.
Yeah, and
Christopher Lee.
They were big. They brought back the, that gothic feel. Originally they seemed to be trying to take the subject serious.
Plus they give you color.
And, and it was a bit schlocky in hindsight, but it had a pretty good feel if you're into this sort of thing. And it was the best we had at the time.
And for certain actors of that time, they kind of made their names with some of these films. Christopher Lee, that's one of his
Peter
big
Cushing
resume.
with the Frankenstein.
Exactly.
They were British. They were filmed for British audiences, but they made it here, and they still hold up if you like those actors and stuff like that.
And that went through the late 50s to the early 70s. So that, again, rode that wave that was earlier done with Bela Lugosi. These actors were able to continue it in that manner, which these days you can't do that. You can't last that long with a genre. It seems that these days we don't have the attention span to stay with a genre that long.
I'll tell you what probably killed the Christopher Lee Hammer films is his role in the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun, because the last one of the Hammer series he refused to do because it was at the same time as
he had better things to do.
Yeah, I think he was beyond.
He was moving on.
Beyond that. He was a big name again, or for the first time, depending on your point of view.
Now that's a little bit of the background in terms of the long sustaining periods where a specific vampire
and in a series,
right? You could consider them a series. A certain actor keeps doing it for year after year after year. That kind of ended around that time. After the early 70s, it kind of transformed a little bit into these, every now and then you would get these little blips of vampire films, whether it would be serious, comedy, horror, whatever, action.
It lost its teeth for a while, let's say.
No pun intended. But nowadays, we are currently in a resurgence, if you will, of the vampire genre.
Renaissance.
Right. We've actually seen this before, even, at our young age of being in our 40s. We've seen the blips come up and go, and we're definitely in the middle of a blip right now. I don't know if we're at the height or we're starting to decline, but we're in it. Let's talk about one version of the vampire story, which is very, you could say, targeted to a specific audience. This isn't a mass marketed general
it started
audience.
Out as for a targeted audience. I think it's evolved.
Now, you got to also keep in mind, we're dealing also with properties now that are not necessarily films only. They came from somewhere else. Like a lot of these other films.
These came from books, obviously.
Right, but they all kind of came from the same book, the same classical vampire story.
Bram Stoker's
these are very specifically written stories aimed at a certain market that became very popular in the literary world, that somebody said, as usual, hey, let's make a movie here. There's a movie here. There's a market. And in a way, I think some of these films wouldn't be possible without the Harry Potter kind of franchise. So let's talk about Twilight, James.
Well, Twilight's something I would not normally have gotten involved with. And I'm not really a vampire aficionado. There's a lot I don't know. And I'm not a Twihard by any means, which is, kind of like...
Is that the term?
It's kind of like a Trekker. Trekkie. It's a name that I don't know if the fans like or not anymore. But this was a series of books. And like any, series of books in the modern time, they get picked up to be made into films. Good thing for Twilight fans that the original incarnation of it never really worked out. It was picked up by another company other than Summit, who's put out these movies. And it would have been a totally different movie. It really wasn't even Twilight as far as fans know. But this movie came out in around 2008. And the funny thing about it is it kind of like snuck up and then exploded at the same time. It's hard to say. There was nothing, and then all of a sudden, that's all people could talk about.
But the books had exploded already.
The books were big, and they were aimed at younger people, probably teenage girls.
Teenage girls, but not Harry Potter teenager.
No, Harry Potter was more
older.
like a younger child, like maybe
like a preteen.
Preteen. This was probably for like 13-ish and
to 18,
to 17,
something like that. Okay.
And I didn't know anything about it. And then all of a sudden, all you could hear about are these characters, Edward and Bella and Jacob and, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, I really didn't get involved. I even remember when it came out on DVD, it after it had been out now in the theater and then exploded again because now people had it at home. And for vampires, it's almost like that's just changed the game. Now, there's been other things concurrently going on that have helped it, but these characters seem to have something that people like. And the fans should really credit the director of Twilight, the first movie, Catherine Hardwicke, because she didn't make a movie that was all like blown out or a teenage sex comedy or teenage sex drama or anything like that. She seems to have a way to take younger actors and get honest performances out of it. And it's hard for me to explain because, like I said, I wasn't a fan, and this is not my thing. I'm not into romance movies and things like that. But when I watched this for the first time on DVD, well after it had been out and, everybody else was on board, there was a certain honesty, if you will, to this movie. And the way she did it, she made a movie that would hold up. Even if it didn't involve vampires, if these characters were just regular high school students. And there weren't the typical stereotypes. I feel, this is the jock and this is this and this. This isn't like that. It makes me actually surprised that I enjoyed it so much because it was, like I said, very honest. And the characters of Edward and Bella, it made you feel like there was a real connection when you were watching it. And take that out then. And you don't even have to worry about, like I said, the vampire attraction. The other characters in the movie, the other kids in the school, the family members in the Cullen family, they were compelling. You enjoyed seeing what they were doing, and you wanted to learn more about them. They seemed like good people, a nice town. The dad, Bella's dad, you get the feel maybe in the beginning if you didn't know better, like this guy's going to turn in, maybe he's a jerk. Or
he's up to
like
something.
like he's something creepy. But he's a genuinely Nice dad. If this was his daughter, any other dad would act the same way. He'd be very protective. He happened to be a police chief. So I feel that, and this comes from the director. It has to, because she cast everybody and she set the tone. And I don't think this franchise would have been half as successful if it went another way, if a different director had blown it out. And I keep saying that, like not blown out, but a lot of people put down these movies because it's like, teenage, for young girls. But it's just weird. Even recently, I went back and checked it out. It was on, on regular TV, and I happened to catch some of it. And it still holds up, even after the other ones. It has a nice tone. It feels legitimate. It feels like this could have really happened. These people could really exist. These aren't superheroes. They happen to have supernatural abilities, and it turns out that one of the characters is a wolf, and there are wolves.
So they're starting to mix not so much genres, but the subgenres.
Well, that's the thing. I think they found a way to modernize these characters, which is a good thing for Stephanie Meyer, the author, and some of the other subjects we're going to talk about. They found a way to freshen up these characters, these vampires. I guess lately they've tried to bring back the Mummy and stuff, but they basically turned that into Indiana Jones, so it's like totally different. But the wolves have certain personality that you would know from the Wolfman, as the old days. But modern, there's more to them. It's not just some guy that turns into a wolf when the moon comes out and then he's crazy. They still have traits of their human side, or I guess, or if they're inherently wolves, they have traits.
Well, what I noticed that in these films, the character of the Wolfman, the race of Wolfman, it's treated more like the American Indian.
Yeah,
it's a tribe. It's more of a community, and it's
pack.
It's not too individualistic, crazy monster going around eating people. It's more of a.
They didn't make it
these guys.
They didn't make it a goof.
Guys.
There is a. There is a reasoning and a pattern for how it works. And the same thing with the vampires. Now, without getting into the whole story, this particular family of vampires, they're not really a family, but this particular family of vampires has set themselves apart from regular, assuming vampires really exist. They've set themselves apart. They don't feed off of humans. They try to be above that. They try to control themselves in a different way. And it makes it a little more compelling. And it's a little smarter.
Now, here's the thing. This is one of the things I do like about this particular series, which, again, I'm not crazy about it. There are certain things I like and I dislike. But what I do like is, obviously, anything that's vampire related, anything that takes the myth of the vampire and examine it, whether it's a confrontation between vampires and non-vampires, or even amongst vampires themselves. I love all the stuff they do in Europe where they meet the ancient ones, the older ones, the ones that they're kind of breaking away from.
There's quite a history and backstory that's separate from what we think of Vlad or somebody like that
and it's
in Transylvania.
Cool little mythological story they
There's
built.
A hierarchy.
And I kind of seen this before. The last time I've seen it was an interview with a vampire. At a certain point, they do touch upon those other ones that are, oh, you think we're nasty? Look at those crazy ones over there. And I like that. I love that, and that's something that gets done in a lot of genres, and we'll talk about it in a little bit when it comes to True Blood. It's you think you know the bad guy, wait till you meet this guy, and I love that stuff.
So what I was saying about this director, Catherine Hardwicke, the way she set the tone, and like I said, it was a nice, by itself, take the word vampire out, take the wolves, take anything out. It was a nice, very well-made movie. Fans should really thank her. I don't know how she's thought of in the community. She may be loved, but it's like Irvin Kershner for Empire Strikes Back. Without Irvin Kershner, the Star Wars saga just doesn't hold up. It could have fallen apart if, the next movie after Star Wars A New Hope was a Phantom Menace type thing. So anyway, the second movie in the Twilight series seemed to me, as like I said, a non-super fan, it seemed to get a little confused. That may be because of the book, it may be because of the new director, or they wanted to jazz it up. Perhaps the studio wanted to have it be a little bit bigger because now they had this huge franchise and they needed to capitalize on it. But I think by the third movie, it felt good again, and the story was, like I said, to me it was a little convoluted, the second movie. By the third one, I felt the focus, and I felt the characters acted the way they should. And the only one I've actually seen in the theater is the first part of the fourth movie, Breaking Dawn, Part 1, which is the fourth movie. And it made a ton of money. Everybody knows about it. If you're into it, you know it exists. You saw it, or you're waiting for it for DVD, or you've seen it on DVD already. But it definitely now is a big movie. It's not this small little movie. It definitely knows it's a $500 million to, $1 billion business. And by the time Breaking Dawn Part 2 is out, it'll be one of the biggest franchises in history.
They took a page from the Harry Potter book once again in taking their final installment of the film.
And which is brilliant.
And breaking it up into 2 films.
I wish historically we could go back and do that with certain...
other franchises, huh?
Yeah, because they didn't have to cut out important parts to make it fit into a 2-hour movie. You've got basically 4 hours to work with, a big book. I even feel I wish some of the Harry Potter movies would have been able to go back and there'd be, 20 movies instead of, 8.
Well, I haven't seen the latest part. I'm only up to the 3rd film right now. And I will see the remaining parts when they come to DVD because, like I said before, I do like the mythological vampire stuff. I'm not crazy about the teenagery angst and who will
I guess I kind of like that for some reason. It was weird.
The soap opera aspect of the relationship stuff. But that's something that I always have problems with in these type of movies. And when I'm watching this, it's kind of like I'm like, all right, let's go. Keep going. Let's get to the let's get to the fun stuff.
In this case, we were completely opposite because I kind of like the interaction of the characters and their relationships and how the relationships were formed.
I love the effects. I love the fighting, the fast movements, the disintegrating.
And they seem to use, it's not quite a Hong Kong or Chinese wire movie, but it seemed to almost utilize some of those styles.
A lot of stuff like that.
And it works great. And the way the cameras move and everything. Like I said, even the use of color or lack of color for certain scenes. That's why I say that director should be given a lot more credit than maybe she is because she really set the tone.
The thing is that whether you like it or don't like it, the point is that this type of a film, its popularity, it's keeping the genre alive. And that's what's important.
And
I'm not, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of this film, but it is feeding off other stuff and other stuff is being fed from it. So it's keeping it alive. And right now, like I said before, we are in a period of a chunk of time where this is definitely one of the big players in the vampire
I don't know
arena.
if this will hold up like a Star Wars or Star Trek, but I have a feeling that the fans are very loyal. Sadly, there probably won't be any new material after next year, but for the fans, that is. But it's a serious series that people probably look down on because everybody talks about how good looking and the stars are, and Edward and Bella, and what team are you on? Are you like Jacob? Do you like this or that? But it's definitely a serious movie that, in the vampire world, it's going to be up in the top 5 forever.
Now, another contender in this genre is in the television side, specifically on the cable television side.
Which is huge now.
Yeah, now we've had a number of entries on the television side, which we will talk about in a few minutes. And even currently, there's still a couple of more contenders out there, but the big dog here is True Blood, as far as television goes.
And that also comes from a series of books. So, it has its literary roots as far as just like the vampire.
Right, but it coming to television, it almost mimics the Twilight timeline in terms of it came from a book, and around 2008, all of a sudden they started popping on film and television.
Yeah, it has a huge history. The book set up a huge backstory, a huge hierarchy. But the thing is, I can tell you, if I wasn't as huge a vampire fan and I barely knew Twilight until I, saw the DVDs, True Blood was not for me. It wasn't my kind of thing. I never would have said, I can't wait for the new season to start.
Let's first understand what we're dealing with here. Twilight, we said, was more of a post-teen, teen target audience. True Blood is an adult series.
Now the books could have been anywhere from, and most of these are probably like for girls. The vampire lore has always been more of how this character,
well, if it's from the point of view of a woman, obviously it's aimed at a woman.
And True Blood's main character is Suki Stackhouse. So it clearly involves a young, attractive lady and how she interacts and how the vampires react around her. But, I mean, there are elements in the book and the show have that in them, but
it's more adult.
Yeah, with HBO involved.
Not only that,
Alan Ball was
you got to remember, it's Alan Ball who previously had done 6 Feet Under, which
he has a certain style about him. And
6 Feet Under was a series that not only was it an adult theme series, but it wasn't afraid to bring into the foreground alternate lifestyles, and they didn't have any problem showing you what was happening behind closed doors. So,
and that's fine. HBO is the perfect point because
you can't do that on regular television.
It's almost better than movies because HBO gives you a little more time. So they'll take a book where in a movie you get 2 hours, but because the series, if they even stay a little bit close to the book's plot, that's 10 episodes usually on HBO.
Now on this show, once again, there is a similarity that I find, not so much obviously not in the target audience. No way in hell this is the same target audience, but in my interest in the show. I have a similar reaction. With True Blood, it's a little better for me because I love the adult stuff. I love the horror stuff. Again,
and the alternate lifestyle stuff.
The relationship stuff. A lot of times I'm like, okay, let's get on with this. Let's move from the CW to the horror. Let's get away from the, will he kiss me? Won't he kiss me? Will she go out with him?
And there's some horror. There's some creepy stuff in True Blood. They've made good use of the genre.
It's a hard R at points. Yeah. And like you said, they don't care in terms of sexuality, any direction. It goes here, it goes there, men, women, whatever. Language, obviously, it's cable. You can do whatever the hell you want. Violence, very violent show at times. It's
and a little bit of gore, there's that kind of. I'm not, since like I said, this vampire genre is not my favorite. So there's times I'll turn away from it. And it's not just because of the sex or anything like that. I'm no prude, but it's a little violent. I mean, I'm not that I'm turning away because I'm so embarrassed or shrieking violent or anything. It's just not my thing. I guess it scares me. Maybe
for me, it fits the theme. In other words, if I'm dealing with vampire films, I want to see horror. I want to see somewhat gory, violent images because that's the theme. Now, granted, I know that a lot of people's perception of the vampire theme is the romantic, gothic, courting, of your prey type of thing. But again, that's not my thing.
Yeah, I always say when I see True Blood, I go, this isn't my cup of tea. The Wookiees are not doing this to the princesses.
And again, this show, similar to Twilight, they do explore subgenres. They have werewolves running around. And they have even other types of bizarre creatures that I don't even know what the hell they are.
I do like... and it's something I never really picked up, and it exists. These characters live forever. They're undead. And I like how, when you think about it, and Twilight deals with this, like when these characters are made, when they become a vampire.
Backstories.
And Vampire Bill is from the Civil War. And the same thing with...
Eric is from like a Viking or something.
Yeah, and it's the same thing in Twilight. The characters have... this historically when
I love that. You're absolutely right. I love that.
And it helps their character and the type of person they are. Like Bill seems to be a Southern gentleman type character. He has his dark sides, but that stuff I do like. And when I think about it more, I think I'd be more into this genre because you can explore that. It's like, wow, you're right. This guy,
right? You've seen it. You also seen Eric been around since like he was like in the Nazis. He was like in World War II.
And then how they interact over these years. And, they have to somehow keep themselves, I guess, alive, as the way vampires are alive, they have to keep themselves undead, let's say, but they have to adapt historically. And in the time of True Blood now, they're in a very southern town where it almost touches upon old racial stereotypes. The vampires are now the undesirable race or the unpopular race, and how they interact with the locals. This is something that could turn into an entire
show, but not only a race thing, but it kind of comes into when we talked about earlier, the sexual explicit nature of the show, I think it's not only a race thing, but it's a combination of race and sexual orientation. I think the gay issue in this show, it's almost a substitute for the vampire thing. So, because in the show, the vampires are out. People are aware of them, and it's like a minority that they're allowing them to do what they want, but they have to be looked at. And
in Twilight, they're still undercurrent, like they're underground.
Right.
Like, most people don't realize that they're vampires or wolves or whatever.
But in True Blood, they're out there, but they don't want to be too public. At least the majority of them don't want to be too public.
It's even a little bit, to tie it into the comic books, it's even a little bit like the X-Men. They're mutants versus the humans, and how they have to interact, or who has stereotypes or prejudice against whom.
Right, so they're able to mix the usual prejudices having to do with race or sexual orientation. The vampire umbrella kind of covers all that, and you get to see some of that. And, they're not all angels, and they're not all monsters. It's a little bit of everything you get, which is kind of cool.
But it does get a little crazy. And I mean, I think the high point of season 2, I think it was the finale, with this like crazy orgy involving a character that everybody knows also from Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and things like that. But that was probably the nuttiest.
And that was a bizarre creature also
I'm not sure I even still know what went on
I don't even know what it was. But
everybody woke up from the event feeling a little bit dirty.
However, with this show, I think also their characters, to me, they're more memorable and they're stronger. Bill is a great character. The actor's great. The guy who plays Eric is very strong too. A completely different kind of bad guy, an ambiguous bad guy. And in the last season I watched, the guy who played the King of Mississippi, oh my God, that was such a great character that it's like, this guy is just out of his mind. It's wonderful.
And Suki herself, it doesn't hurt that she's very attractive. Like the characters, depends on what you're looking for. There's a little something for everybody. And Suki is, clearly a good-looking woman. I've met her in real life,
and she was an X-Men too.
And she is, she's a very pretty lady, and they know how to use her in this. And that definitely, I guess the impression is she's supposed to be a little bit more innocent, when I don't think that's the case, but I think that's what, how it started out.
Well, the third part that we need to address here is, granted, obviously Twilight is a film, obviously, but it's a franchise. It's more than a film. The other thing we need to talk about is the current movies. In other words, what is the current crop of vampire-themed movies?
Yeah, if these two have now set these are
franchises.
If these have set the foundation for the new going forward, this is the new golden age.
But the other thing also is that as far as television goes, there is a little bit of a history as far as giving them a try. Now, granted, you can sprinkle out a whole bunch of little things where certain episodes of certain shows like, Supernatural, X-Files, where every now and then they'll touch upon the vampire theme. And even older shows like The Night Stalker, they hit vampires here and there. But one of the biggest shows, as far as I know, now granted, I've never seen it, that exclusively dealt with vampires, not only did it deal with vampires, but it was a full-blown soap opera, was Dark Shadows.
Dark Shadows is going to be big again
back in 66.
Soon. Yeah, it was very big. It was like a soap opera, just like General Hospital or any of these, and it would really frighten people. And they're bringing it back, and Johnny Depp is playing Barnabas.
Yes.
And I think that's going to, certainly it's going to have a different feel and look, and it's trying to be more like, these present vampire shows. But that's going to be a big thing again. And then that'll get people to watch the original, and I think people will be impressed with what they were doing back then. Right. It might not be, as timely. It might be a little dated, but I think it still holds up.
Now, that was, as far as I can remember, that's probably one of the biggest, if you want to call them long-lasting vampire theme shows on TV. I don't think we've had something that big until the late 90s with Buffy, which was based again on a movie.
Buffy started out as a film,
which wasn't that successful.
No, it didn't hold out. And it's almost not the same. It's the same character, but if you watch them, it's almost like I said with Twilight, what Twilight almost became. Luke Perry was in it. I think Christy Swanson was Buffy. Yeah. It was a movie that luckily had a second life, and Fox, I guess, still had the rights to it, and they said, let's give it another try. And that's probably what set the tone for the present vampire craze, even though the other ones were books. But Buffy really had a long run with Angel and the character Spike.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but with Buffy, the central theme was vampire, but they did do their off.
Actually, the central theme was she was a vampire hunter. She had this ability to kill or hunt or kill. And it turned out that, like Twilight, not all the vampires were just gory bloodsuckers. They seem a little creepy. They were very scary when they
what
turned.
I'm saying is that the show also touched upon other creatures. In other words,
Yeah.
kind of like Supernatural is not about vampires, but every now and then you get vampires. Buffy's the other way around. It's mainly about vampires, but they touch upon other
There were some
themes,
others, but I
other
think these
myths.
characters, it's another soap operas or a weekly series, that these characters are intertwined with the humans of, I guess it was Sunnyvale, I think, and they had a long run. They lasted 7 years. They probably could have lasted an 8th year. And
Wow.
Joss Whedon,
yeah.
well, who was brilliant, and it's like, you don't even realize how good he is until you're watching it, and the stuff he's done. They definitely had room for a 8th season. I have a feeling it was a TV thing and a contract thing, and who had to get paid for an 8th year, because usually TV contracts are 7 for syndication. There's all kinds of other stuff, but he wound up having another season, like graphic novels or comics or
Plus,
something.
he then moved on to, at a certain point, he moved on to Firefly, which was another popular, but
That
didn't
didn't
last
get-
long.
yeah.
And
Not
next
vampire.
year, we're going to see him directing The Avengers, a big, gigantic,
That's- yeah.
mega blockbuster in the works. But let's go now to movies, because, like we said before, this is the current stuff we're talking about. But currently, there have been some entries, not franchises, entries. And the two most recent ones I can think of is Let Me In, which is a vampire film that was redone from a Swedish film called Let the Right One In, which I've seen both. I've seen the Swedish one and the American one. Very creepy, very dark, classic, very vampire-y film, which was great. I recommend it to everyone. The other one was a remake of Fright Night that they make. And Fright Night was a mid-'80s film.
That was Colin Farrell and David Tennant from Doctor Who. So.
Right. And, here you have a situation where they're remaking previous vampire films, not as successful, but you're dealing with major actors being thrown into these vampire roles.
I'd say if you were a vampire genre fan, this is probably as good as it was for science fiction fans in the late 70s and the early 80s, or, Western fans, at that period of time. They're really taking the subject serious again, making it something you can pay attention to and enjoy instead of just some, schlocky horror.
Now, the thing is that, yes, there are tons and tons of schlocky vampire horror films out there.
As there
for
are
years.
with any, as there are with any movie.
I mean, I'm sure the 50s, the 60s, whatever. But even through our lifetime, the amount of time we've been watching films and going to the movies, there's quite a number of films that have not necessarily spawned off any franchises, but they're memorable. And let's go through a couple of them, because you can kind of...
Because this helps people figure... Some people, like I wasn't a big vampire fan. This list might remind some people.
It's a bit of a timeline of, oh my God, I remember, that was 1980, whatever. And let's start with like the late 70s.
The list is pretty
That's
impressive.
kind of when we kind of started going to the movies by ourselves, let's say. But I remember one of them was Salem's Lot, which... Now, was that
I think there was a TV miniseries type thing. David Soul. I know it as David Soul because he was Hutch from Starsky and Hutch, so it got my attention.
And it was based
but it
on
was a little
Stephen
too.
King.
It was a little too spooky for me.
It was very
even
dark,
on TV.
very different kind of movie for him, and based on Stephen King, the king of horror from back then. In 1979, we also have an very unusual comedy, Love at First Bite, which George Hamilton, which is great. And I love that film because to me, it's a companion.
Back, Black Chicken.
It's a companion piece to Zorro the Gay Blade.
Yeah.
He played such a funny, and he never done it again.
And that tied in, again, like, not exactly the same as Twilight and True Blood, but Dracula was remade with Frank Langella, who I recall, I mean, it wasn't for me. I was a little kid, but Frank Langella did an awesome job, and he was very, they took the subject serious
from the late 70s,
yeah, and he was, he was very seductive, and nice, good voice, and looked good on the screen. So, like they had their little bit of tie in there.
In the early 80s, we also had, actually in 1983, we had both The Hunger, which was one with David Bowie.
Yeah. That was
which was a very creepy,
little arty and
yeah, weird one. 85, we have Fright Night, the original, which is still classic, way much better than the remake. And I love that film. I love it. 85, you also have Life Force, science fiction vampires now. When they start mixing it up, which was that was
a little weird for me.
It was a Tobe Hooper film. Then we have in 87 a good pair of vampire films. One of them, The Lost Boys, which.
It still holds up. It is a little shocky because it's a Corey movie,
but it's kind of like it's not exactly a comedy, but it's got very funny elements, and it's kind of like an action film, and it's kind of like a horror film. It's a teenagery fun vampire.
That's
thing.
what I was glad Twilight wasn't. That's what I was trying to say. That one could have been, a big name of the day, the Coreys, and Jamie Gertz and Kiefer Sutherland.
Very young Kiefer Sutherland.
Yes, Kiefer Sutherland. I don't know why I can't say it.
Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, Twilight could have evolved into that and been a little bit goofy, but it didn't. But Lost Boys has still some good elements. Hey, and who doesn't like a oiled up sax player?
You got to look it up on YouTube. It's amazing. 87. You have also my favorite vampire film of all time, Near Dark, which is Kathleen Bigelow directed.
And now she's an Oscar winner, Kathleen Bigelow.
Oscar winner, Adrian Pizarro, Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen. I could do an entire film about this movie, and I probably will one day, but I won't bother to. Again, straight horror, contemporary, not gothic, but contemporary straight horror. It's almost a Western in a way, this film, because it's set in Texas, and it's very southernish, westerny looking. In 94, there was a big resurgence with the Anne Rice vampire books that led to the filming of Interview with a Vampire with Brad Pitt. Tom Cruise doesn't get any bigger than that.
It was a Tom Cruise movie, but it turns out Brad Pitt now.
He was an up-and-coming.
Yeah, people really need to check that out. If you even like Brad Pitt a little bit with his modern stuff, check that out because he stole the movie.
Right, and that was, again, that to me I think was as big as what's happening now with Twilight and some of these other films where it was gigantic. The fact that the books were behind it pushed it even further than a regular film.
But it should have been a series, and it
didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if it was because Tom Cruise, they used him, but then he was too big, and I don't really know what happened at the time, but it should have had more strength than it did.
I think it was also controversial at the time because the dual sexuality of the vampire was something that some of these stars probably didn't want to get too involved with.
Which we failed to mention, the first, shall we say, gay or same-sex vampires comes from Blackula, a blaxploitation Dracula, and you got to just check it out. I mean, that's talk about a show on its own.
Now, moving on to 1998, another change to the genre, we have Blade. This is the first time I think we see an actual comic book character who's somewhat of a superhero-ish type of character made a movie out of. Again, another great horror action film, and I think technically it's the first modern Marvel film that actually made money and was successful.
That wasn't goofy at all. That was no Punisher or Fantastic Four.
Now, in 2000, they also released a movie called Shadow of the Vampire that was somewhat popular or somewhat successful, and it's because it had to do with the original Nosferatu film, and it's a takeoff on the making of the film. And the twist is that the actor Max Schreck is really a vampire in real life, and I think it's like a reporter or somebody who's following him around is realizing that this guy's not just an actor, he's for real.
Yeah.
And it was a cool little thing. William Dafoe was the star. Great film. In 2003, we have the first of the Underworld films, which
is still going strong.
They're still going strong. There's another one coming. And in this particular genre, again, they mix the vampire with the werewolf genres. They try to combine the two, but it's a more stylized film.
That's what's funny. The vampire movies have held up, but it seemed like even though wolves are involved in the Wolfman and things, they tried to capitalize on that with a modern Wolfman movie, which you would have thought could have, and it was great people. Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro
and Joe Johnston directed it, who just did Captain America.
And if you watch it with the sound off, it looked great, but it just didn't go anywhere. It just was really flat, and it's too bad because this is like the modern resurgence of the Universal monsters again and stuff.
Now, we also had a little before that, I forgot to mention, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which also reminded me of the Wolfman. It was a more classical approach by Francis Ford Coppola.
That is the similar era of Interview with a Vampire. And with Gary Oldman, he becomes every character. I mean, even if he does a crap movie, he still brings something to it that you just say, wow.
I had never seen that kind of performance for that type of character, and it's like he's amazing. That actor's incredible.
The music.
And he has different looks. That's the thing. He has so many different...
Yeah, I mean, between that and Interview with the Vampire, that could have been a big vampire era.
Yeah.
I don't know how other people, real vampire fans, feel, but I don't think they dislike that movie.
Plus, the thing about that film was that they purposely, because I remember hearing Coppola talking about it, he purposely wanted to avoid high-end special effects as much as possible. He wanted to purposely do a lot of in-camera effects, wipes, fades, things that they used to do in the old days and try to stay away from as much CGI, even at that time, as possible, because he was more interested in creating the classic look of the film than the slick new thing of, the flavor of the month type of deal. More recently, we also had 30 Days of Night, which is another high horror type of vampire film, again, based on a comic book. Pretty good, nice and creepy work. And whatever future stuff is about to come out. We already mentioned Dark Shadows and Underworld, but there's more vampire-themed things coming down the pipe.
I think we've almost forgotten one more. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, which I think will be coming to a theater soon.
That's for real?
Yeah. In the next 5 years, we might be talking about how they killed the vampire genre again, but now's a good time. If you like this kind of stuff, I like where they're going with some of this stuff as a non-huge vampire fan, and, it's thoughtful stuff. It's interesting stuff.
Cool. Well, I would like to thank James for joining me on this modern vampire special. And we hope to see you guys here next time when we discuss a different topic or a commentary or some other weird thing. So on behalf of everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
Stop.